Good evening and welcome to Pax Christi, Florida's first advocacy training webinar in conjunction with our campaign that we call PC-FLAC 24. That means Pax Christi, Florida Advocacy Campaign in 2024. Folks are coming in, and as they come in, I think that's fine. I think we're expecting about 30 people, which is wonderful. This is being recorded, so those folks that don't get to see it, they'll be able to see it when it gets posted to our website. I'm coming to you from St. Johns County, just south of Jacksonville. I've had the pleasure of serving as the chair of the PC-FLAC steering committee as we've attempted to do what we've never done before. And we kind of feel like we're walking on water. But in any case, we're going to do this. Our aim, of course, is to bring an alternative faith-based voice to our legislators in Tallahassee. We seek to dialogue with them as we invite them to a consciousness that's rooted in our shared humanity and in the pursuit of the common good. Of course, we're rooted in the nonviolent Jesus, those of us that are part of Pax Christi, and we bring that charism into the work that we do in our advocacy. So as we embark upon this journey, whether you make it to Tallahassee or not, it is our hope that this evening's program will empower you, give you knowledge and skills, confidence to advocate in your local district. We'll hear a lot about that later on. We are a branch of Pax Christi USA, that's the National Catholic Peace Movement, and we strive to live a gospel nonviolence through the practice of prayer, study, and action. Okay, whatever your faith system is, we welcome you, and we collaborate with many people of faith and without faith around our shared vision of building the beloved community. So if you would, please pray with me for a moment here. And I'm improvising this prayer from what was the 50th anniversary prayer of Pax Christi USA last year. God of peace and justice, as we embark upon this journey, make us weavers of your peace that will only come through justice. As we take up the thread of being peacemakers who have gone before, adding our collective contributions with creativity and making space for the future and generations yet to come to weave that tapestry. Keep us firmly rooted in your love, love that transcends time and space. Guide us with clarity of vision and purpose to study the past in order to learn from history and heal the wounds and brokenness and much of the brokenness in our legislature. Let us acknowledge your presence as we look to the future, nourish our enthusiasm, help our dreams emerge, and enable hope to blossom. Together, we will learn from one another, and we will amplify our collective prophetic voices and weave the work of peace and justice in the halls of the House and Senate of the Florida State Legislature. We ask all of this through our brother Jesus, way of nonviolence, weaver of peace. Amen. Amen. A brief word about tonight's program before I introduce the speakers. This is a virtual program, of course, and we have marvelous panel. We're thrilled with this panel to bring you these people who have done it and who have many skills and much knowledge, way beyond what we can cover this evening. And we'll talk about where we go from here at the end. There'll be an opportunity to address future actions. We want to remind you to please post your questions to chat. And we have somebody that's monitoring the chat. And after the four panelists speak, we'll be bringing in Ann Richter to facilitate our Q&A. And then we'll have actually a second Q&A, so to speak, as we move towards closure. At the very end, there'll be an exit survey. So it is my pleasure now to bring forth to you our first panelist, Meg Olson. Meg was the very first person we contacted when we thought about doing this. Meg comes from Network in Washington, D.C., the Catholic Social Justice Lobby Organization. She heads up their mobilization, grassroots mobilization team, and she's going to talk to us about toward a better kind of politics. Kind of reminds me of a guy named Francis. So Peg, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be collaborating with Pax Christi Florida and of course, Pax Christi USA. Just grateful for this opportunity and excited to walk alongside all of you on this incredible journey. I'm just gonna share. Oh, Judy, I can't share my screen.
I can fix that.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Marvelous. Right. All right, so as John said, tonight I am talking about toward a better kind of politics, which here in Washington, Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice is working at the federal level to create this, to engender this. And it really is this idea that as Catholics, we are called to serve and advocate for the common good. So early on in his papacy, on a homily at a mass in 2013, Pope Francis said, "Politics, according to the social doctrine of the Church, is one of the highest forms of charity because it serves the common good. I cannot wash my hands. We all have to give something. A good Catholic meddles in politics, offering the best of themselves so those who govern can govern." When I first read this from Pope Francis over a decade ago, I patted myself on the back. At the time, I was working in the Advocacy Department at Catholic Charities in St. Louis, Missouri. I was a registered lobbyist, and I served on the Public Policy Committee for the Missouri Catholic Conference. My job was meddling in politics. I was a good Catholic. But in all seriousness, let's unpack this quote for a minute. I think everyone here knows that the common good is a central theme in our church's social teaching and tradition. It is our call as Catholics to ensure that all individuals and communities, no matter their racial or ethnic identity, zip code, income, immigration status, or gender, have what they need to flourish. Our tradition's preferential option for the poor and vulnerable requires us to center and care for those who are marginalized. And while charity is important and so much needed, when we look around and see that the common good is compromised, it's time to transform those structures and systems that harm so many of our siblings every day. And that, my friends, requires us to meddle in politics, even when it feels hopeless, especially when it feels hopeless. Our call to participation requires each of us to do our part. And not everyone here tonight on this Zoom needs to go to Tallahassee to meddle in politics either. We'll talk more about this at the end, but you can meet with your elected officials in district, write letters to the editor, make phone calls, and do all sorts of other things that we haven't even imagined yet. Now, I could just continue sharing Pope Francis quotes with you and going over Catholic social teaching, and I'll continue to do that tonight. But let's take a deeper dive for a moment and consider our own Catholic and Christian theology. Many of us, myself included, wouldn't necessarily connect theology with advocacy. But when we think about theology as an organized system and knowledge of understanding about the nature of the divine, and we think of advocacy as an area that our knowledge and understanding of the divine helps us interpret, then we can confidently speak of theology as advocacy, and have a theology of advocacy. Let's begin with our shared foundational belief, as Scripture tells us that we are all created in the image and likeness of God, and we call this Imago Dei. Imago Dei is the source of the inherent dignity that every person has, and this dignity must be upheld in every aspect of our lives, including our lives as citizens and members of society. We believe, therefore, that society, government, and institutions all must create the environment where every person can not only live, but also thrive. This means, as Catholics and as Christians, we must ensure that our civic and political systems serve people and not the other way around. So, when we meddle in politics, we are bringing our Catholic and Christian values, our formation as people who process a particular understanding of and faith in God, and who follow Jesus Christ, the peacemaker, who we believe is God incarnate. We follow them into the public square through an exercise of our rights and responsibilities. Our faith values also shape our understanding of what it means to be a citizen of and an advocate in this diverse, multi-ethnic, multicultural, interreligious, pluralistic country and your state of Florida. It means that we advocate for the common good to ensure that our social, civic, and political systems honor the dignity of every human being. And to return to Francis's 2013 homily, we offer the best of ourselves in this public square so that our elected officials can govern. So there is a tendency for faith leaders, voters, and advocates to create a hierarchy of policies that elected officials and the general public should consider. And those policies often prioritize one group of people over another, or even pit people against each other. However, in Pope Francis's 2018 apostolic exhortation, Gaudete and Exultate, or Rejoice and Be Glad, Francis declares, because of Imago Dei, because of the inherent dignity of every person, that all lives are equally sacred. Pope Francis writes in paragraph 101, and I'll make sure everyone gets all of my references after this presentation. Our defense of the innocent unborn, for example, needs to be clear, firm, and passionate. For at stake is the dignity of human life, which is always sacred and demands love for each person, regardless of his or her stage of development. Equally sacred, however, are the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned, and the underprivileged, the vulnerable, infirm, and elderly exposed to covert euthanasia, the victims of human trafficking, new forms of slavery, and every form of rejection. As I reflected on the signs of the times in your state of Florida, I thought about the vulnerable and infirm who are exposed to covert euthanasia because your legislature hasn't expanded Medicaid. I also thought about the infirm and the elderly who are exposed again to covert euthanasia because they are so vulnerable to the extreme heat caused by climate change. Francis continues in paragraph 102. We often hear it said that with respect to relativism and the flaws of our present world, the situation of migrants, for example, is a lesser issue. That a politician looking for votes might say such a thing is understandable, but not a Christian for whom the only proper attitude is to stand in the shoes of our sisters and brothers of ours who risk their lives to offer a future to their children. I think it's important as you enter this advocacy, maybe for the first time ever, and maybe you've been doing this for years, but to remember that engaging in politics with this posture that Francis presents us as equally sacred is not taking a partisan position. It may feel like it at times, but it is not. It is simply positioning ourselves with those who are marginalized and have the least power in our society. So sharing Francis's belief that all are equally sacred leads us to be multi-issue advocates. And this is so incredibly important that as we're serving the common good, that we are addressing multiple issues, which I know you are on as you're getting your policy papers together. It's important to remember that focusing on a single issue allows all the other social sins in our world to continue on unchecked. Racism, economic exploitation, harm to immigrants, environmental exploitation, and so much more. Especially when we think about racism, I recall when Pope Francis said in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in June of 2020, he said, "We cannot tolerate or turn a blind eye to racism and exclusion in any form, and yet claim to defend the sacredness of every human life." And of course, our own US bishops in the 1979 Brothers and Sisters to Us, and again in the more recent pastoral, Open Wide Our Hearts, declared racism a sin. It's important to remember that it is immoral to allow a single issue to outweigh other policies that harm immigrants and asylum seekers, people living in poverty, people of color, the LGBTQ community, or the environment. And we are, as Catholics, right? This was expressed in the Second Vatican documents, that we are encouraged that we must listen to our own conscience, our primacy of conscience, and embrace an expansive, inclusive agenda of political priorities instead of a narrow one. We have the wonderful working document for the continental stage of the Synod, where we were instructed, the people of God, all of us, were instructed to enlarge the space of our tents. And so we go to Tallahassee with that spirit. So yes, I'm telling you to go forth and meddle. Your state legislature needs your witness, everyone on here and all of Pax Christi, Florida, and your commitment to the common good. Pope Francis opens chapter 5 of Fratelli Tutti with the observation, the development of a global community of fraternity based on the practice of social friendship on the part of the peoples and nations calls for a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good. As Catholics, our consistent ethic of love and solidarity is an anecdote to the popularism and polarization that Francis talks about. He laments of this rise of populism, where leaders are able to exploit politically a people's culture for their own personal advantage or continuing grip on power. They also seek popularity by appealing to the basest and most selfish inclinations of certain sectors of the population. I believe that embodying Catholic social teaching, seeing the inherent dignity of every person, being in solidarity with the most marginalized, and exercising our call to participation by engaging in advocacy is the answer to the broken and unhealthy politics we see across the country and what you're experiencing in Florida. Embodying Catholic social teaching means that we approach our elected officials with respect and hope. We work to transform the hearts of our adversaries and advocate not just for, but with the people who experience oppression, and we follow the wisdom of their lived experiences. Living as multi-issue advocates helps us build the kingdom of God, and it helps our multiracial, multicultural, pluralistic society flourish. So I'll leave you with with one of the final paragraphs of Fratelli Tutti. Francis writes, at a time when various forms of fundamentalist intolerance are damaging relationships between individuals, groups, and peoples, Let us be committed to living and teaching the value of respect for others, a love capable of welcoming differences, and the priority of the dignity of every human being over his or her ideas, opinions, practices, and even sins. Even as forms of fanaticism, closed-mindedness, and social and cultural fragmentation proliferates in present-day society, a good politician, the ones that you are going to build relationships with, a good politician will take the first step and insist that different voices be heard. Disagreements may well give rise to conflicts, but uniformity proves stifling and leads to cultural decay. May we not be content with being enclosed in one fragment of reality. And so, my friends of Pax Christi, Florida, I know you are not content with the way things are in your state, and you are going to go boldly, prophetically, and hopefully joyfully into your capital and meeting with your legislators. So may you go forth and build a Florida that is one for todos, todos, todos. Thank you.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Meg, you've laid a marvelous foundation, grounding us in a wonderful, if we will, a theology of advocacy was a phrase you used, and you certainly grounded us in our Catholic social justice teachings, especially in the gift of Francis. So we're going to introduce our second speaker now, and he comes to us from the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops. Meg mentioned that she used to work for one of those outfits in some Midwestern state. And here's Mr. Michael Sheedy, who is the executive director of FCCB in Tallahassee. And for people that aren't familiar with that, this is the official arm, if you will, of the collective ministry of our 8 bishops in Florida, who together advocate on behalf of the Catholic Church in the state of Florida. And Michael is their executive director. Mm-hmm. And we've had the pleasure of actually consulting with Michael previously when we drafted our letter to the bishops, which is something that you all can find on our website. But Michael, we invite you, you're going to speak to us, we understand, about how do we, in fact, relate to our bishops in the most effective way. And then even beyond that, you can tell us a thing or two about your doings with Catholic legislators, in particular, the yays and the nays, and what to avoid and what works, what doesn't work, and all the good that can come from that. So thank you, Michael Sheedy.
Many thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm pleased to speak about speaking Catholic to Catholics. And I guess, the 2 main topics will be focusing on just relating to bishops and then other Catholic legislators, as John mentioned. So first, with respect to bishops, I've had the privilege of serving them for about a decade as executive director and for a number of years prior to that as a staff member at our bishops conference. I can tell you that you won't be surprised if you've not met them, but they are all talented. They are still a diverse group with their own unique personalities and interests. But they are each committed very much to the church's life and mission. When they gather as a group, particularly to engage in the work of our state Catholic conference, they're very collegial. They certainly are free to offer their opinions, and they're very good at that. They tend to come together very well to reach some consensus on a lot of the things that are confronting our state and ways to approach those. I will tell you that as a Catholic, I know so many of you are Catholic, if within each diocese, bishops are really the seat of unity for the Catholic community, I appreciate very much that they are deeply united with the heart and the mind of the global Catholic Church. So I would just point out, just perhaps in the context of this exchange and reflecting on these relationships, I would just make a few points about your very fine letter to the bishops. Just a couple points as you prepare for those meetings and as you continue your outreach. Just to the 3 issues that were identified, particularly looking at racism, you point to an intrinsic evil. Very sadly, there remains plenty of evidence of racism throughout our society in different places and as a source of violence. You raised concerns for gun violence. I can tell you that bishops share that concern. Several of them have presided at funerals following, senseless acts. They've marshaled resources to serve those who've been affected, including survivors, and assisted with funerals and those kinds of things. I would say the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting prominently comes to mind, and the Pulse shooting in Orlando. And with respect to issues of stewardship of creation and responding to climate change, they certainly experience it as they live here in Florida. They administer their dioceses. They work to oversee recovery from hurricanes, both in the church and supporting relief efforts in the broader community. So they'll be ready to speak about these things with you, I can assure you. And with respect to just building relationships with them, as noted, and this makes sense to everybody, it's really good to know a lot about their individual interests. I think, for instance, Bishop Enrique Delgado is a native of Peru. He was trained as an engineer. He's got a very large family here in the United States and family also in Peru still. He has a special role among our bishops in focusing on issues of concern for human life and dignity. So he is becoming more expert, really, I would say, among the bishops on the death penalty and trying to mitigate it. And we've not had much success in that respect, but also concerns for limiting the harm of abortion and protecting the unborn. So those are things that Bishop Delgado is really very interested in. Many of you know Archbishop Wensky. He is the Archbishop of Miami, the president of our conference. Among our bishops here in Florida, he's first among equals. He serves as our president. You might know that he has a wide range of political interests at the local, state, national, international level. He pulls in sources from across the political spectrum as he writes, columns that are, widely read in both secular and Catholic media. But he's particularly a national and international expert, I would say, on immigration policies and interests. So I would just commend you for having made, your interests known to the bishops, and I encourage you to get to know them and discover their interests, both, somewhat personally and politically, and perhaps also pastorally. Many of you probably know them just as Catholics and are aware of their initiatives within your respective dioceses. So I would also, just a final point in reflecting with the bishops and preparing for interactions with them, as you do engage on matters of public policy and the connection of faith and contributions of the church to the public square, it is really good to be focused on specific proposals or bills, legislation. Of course, it's necessary to provide the helpful context around whatever it is you want to talk about so they can relate to it well. And if you're particularly interested in engaging them more deeply, it's also good to understand the objections to those kind of things. So it's really just important to have a good sense for that. This is probably a good segue too into reflecting on speaking Catholic to Catholic legislators, because when you deal with legislators and policymakers, they can have conversations and listen, but to really get engaged and to take actions, it's really good to be focusing on explicit, specific proposals that are before them or that you would like to encourage them to engage on. Now, I will say, I'm somebody who loves Catholic social teaching. I know that is what impels all of you, that the gospel, teachings of the church, and a desire to offer the richness of our tradition to, our society as it addresses or seeks to address many problems that confront us. But I can tell you in my encounters with Catholics and Catholic legislators, we typically cannot assume that because they're Catholic and we're Catholic, that we're going to see eye to eye on everything. Which is somewhat freeing for them. We try to promote their freedom. We do believe that the messages that we're bringing, the proposals that we're asking them to support or to oppose, have a really rational argument that can be provided to them. We try to cast it as if it's our own language, even if we're drawing and quoting specifically from church documents and remarks of the Holy Father and others. We don't try to lead from authority. It's like, we're the bishops, you're a Catholic, get in line. That's not really how we do things. We do endeavor to propose solutions to them, not to impose, which is sometimes a criticism or a critique of those who take positions that are different from ours. Those issues that we want to cite or particular church documents, they can be good in the context of a discussion to support an argument once we've begun to make it. But we try to propose and not to impose. You're probably well aware that, while Catholics probably comprise the largest single group of, at least from a religious perspective, of members in the legislature, they represent diverse political parties. And political parties are increasingly, you might say, at least in the Florida legislature, somewhat top-down oriented. There's a particular party orthodoxy that is rather strong, it's rather well promoted. And I can tell you that in my interactions with Catholic legislators, particularly new ones, there are some who try to be perhaps more Catholic and less Republican or less Democrat. And it's tough for them. A lot of them have taken some positions on bills that are maybe outside what the party would direct them to do, and they suffer for it. Yet that's a very real reality that you should be aware of. And that happens in both parties. So I would just say, it's important to be aware of some of those dynamics. And so even with our Catholic members, we do it again. We propose, we don't impose. I think Pax Christi people would know people need freedom to embrace the good. And so just in summary, just to, to relate some of the mantras that we like to think about in our work at the Florida Catholic Conference, we try to be political without being partisan, to be principled without being ideological, to be civil without being soft, and to be involved without being used. So those are a few thoughts as we continue the evening. I'll look forward to sticking around and being part of the Q&A. But thanks for your good work. Thanks for your interest, your initiative to really engage the legislature and to be united with the bishops in doing that. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Michael Sheedy. And it is a real honor to be able to have you with us, and blessings on the work that you're doing. And I know you're getting into high gear as you meet with the bishops as they shape their legislative agenda through your work and the work of your staff. And we look forward to continuing to work with you, Michael. Thank you. I'm going to shift now, and I'm going to introduce our third speaker, who came to me by happenstance. I did not know this woman until about a month and a half ago, and I happened to show up at the local Democratic Party meeting, and a woman named Rachel Grage was the featured speaker. And she was known as the legislative liaison for the St. John's County Women's Club. And as she told her story, it became very evident to me that Rachel, there she is, that she's a woman of faith, and actually she's Catholic too. And we got together for breakfast, and we started connecting the dots, and we began to see, hey, wow, this is great. She's going to share with us a very unique perspective, and that is kind of getting her feet wet in advocacy and how she jumped into it and became involved in last year's 2023 Florida legislative session. So welcome, Rachel, and thank you for being here with us. And break a leg. Actually, she's an actress too in community theater. So I have to get out there to see your show sometime. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, and everyone for having me tonight. I'm super honored to share my journey and what drives me to make a difference here in Florida. First, I just want to remind everyone, though, that I'm an ordinary citizen, not a lawyer or political scientist, and the thoughts and observations I'm sharing tonight are from my personal life experience. My journey into civic engagement began with my upbringing on the southern shores of Lake Ontario in Oswego, New York, in a household with strong Catholic and Democratic ideals. I went to Catholic school through 8th grade and was instilled with a deep concern for the welfare and dignity of my fellow humans, as well as a sense of profound responsibility as a steward of our dear earth. I went to college at Tulane University in New Orleans, where I earned my bachelor's and master's degrees in biomedical engineering. It was there that I met my future husband, and he received a military scholarship to attend medical school, after which we spent 4 years traveling with the United States Army to his different posts. We moved back to upstate New York, where my husband completed his residency in radiology. During that time, a neighbor of mine reached out to ask me if I would be willing to run for a seat on the board of directors of our 3,500 home community association. I think I ran unopposed, so I won. And it was in that position that I first got to participate in the inner workings of a governmental system. In the last year of my term, I served as that board president, and at that time I found myself at the forefront of a group of residents who effectively blocked the addition of a facility in our residential community that was better suited to a commercially zoned area. In that process, I learned that I had to set aside my preconceived notions to properly assess the situation and come up with actionable steps to resolve the issue and do what I thought was best for our community. Life took an unexpected turn in 2019 when my husband informed me that his job was taking us to Florida right at the moment when I was about to embrace retirement from full-time motherhood. And that seemed like a big enough transition in itself. Leaving behind all that I had worked for in my community and the connections I had made was incredibly difficult, and I felt uncertain about my purpose in this new chapter of my life. But if my faith has taught me anything, it's that sometimes you have to trust your higher power to guide you to your new purpose. So flash forward a couple of years, and it was almost as if the Holy Spirit was guiding me when I received an invitation to join the Democratic Women's Club of St. Johns County. Accepting this invitation was a turning point that rekindled my sense of purpose and reignited my passion for advocacy. I learned a lot quickly from this group of strong women. I joined the club's board of directors several months later and was invited to become the club's legislative liaison. I was part of a statewide team, or I still am, part of a statewide team monitoring the legislative session and reporting back to my individual club, including sending out action alerts. And these alerts included pertinent information on specific bills. We couldn't obviously advocate for every bill, but we kind of picked out the ones that seemed most egregious and need of immediate attention. And I gave instructions in those alerts on how to contact legislators, either by phone or email or a visit. When I signed up to do this job, I didn't know what I was agreeing to exactly, but I knew if I could learn more about the legislative process and content here in Florida and help make sure that everyone has access to accurate information, that could only be a good thing. And I'm sure it goes without saying that I got more than I bargained for with what happened in Tallahassee in just a few short months earlier this year. My eyes were truly open to the depths to which some people will go when unchecked in order to protect their own interests, all while distracting others with petty drama, which only serves to divide us and undermine our humanity. It's easy to become overwhelmed, frustrated, and bitter. But in my life, I've never seen that make anything better. I mean, sure, we feel those feelings. It's only natural. But I was able to remember the issue I had in my community association all those years ago, and that what truly matters is how we channel those feelings into positive and constructive actions. So I decided to take advantage of all the opportunities that came my way to learn as much as possible. I took steps to affect small ripples of change while embracing another passion of mine, theater. By participating in local productions, I strive to tell important stories that contribute to the many conversations we're having in Florida right now. Art and culture are powerful tools for sparking dialogue and fostering empathy, which are essential components of an informed and engaged society. In January, I attended Tally Days, an event set up to allow citizens to see the inner workings of the legislative session, as well as the chance to meet lawmakers and network with both like-minded and not like-minded people. Other participants and I sat in on legislative sessions and got to know the layout of the Capitol. I went back to Tallahassee in February with Equality Florida to lend my support as the Don't Say They bill was being heard. I met so many passionate and dedicated individuals who stood up to hate and ignorance and insisted on being heard. I believe that the key to making a difference, and this is no big secret, is to educate ourselves and then take action. Reading action alerts, attending webinars such as this that are held by local clubs, and listening to representative-sponsored videos and bulletins is the first step. Then getting out there and engaging with our neighbors, registering voters, writing and calling our representatives, taking a trip to Tallahassee and getting involved in the legislative process, signing up for a poll greeter shift, giving a few hours of our time at the party office on a Tuesday, attending a pride parade, running for office, or supporting someone else's campaign are all steps in the journey toward positive change. Pick one or two things that you think you would enjoy and go for it. We must remain committed to our cause. Campaigning for Donna Deegan this past year, passing out leaflets and talking to people in underserved neighborhoods reinforced my belief that people are waking up. They realize the power of their votes. Oh, here's a slide that just shows some of the things that we did with the legislative liaison team. And to finish my sentence, the election of Donna was a tremendous victory for Florida, one that we may not fully appreciate yet, but it feels like a cosmic shift in our state's political landscape. It's proof that change is possible and that we can create a brighter future. With the knowledge I've gained and inspired by recent victories and the resurgence of the Democratic Party, and I don't mean to make this a party presentation, but I am considering running for the District 16 State House seat in 2024. In the previous election, the seat was uncontested, which I find unacceptable. My potential candidacy is fueled by a desire to encourage others, especially individuals who may consider themselves average Joes, to participate in the democratic process. But also let us remember that change won't happen overnight and no one can do it alone. We will undoubtedly continue to face discouragement and daunting obstacles along the way. To maintain our sanity and sustain our efforts, we must take breaks and find other ways to make a difference. In conclusion, remember that change begins with us. Keep coming to meetings, keep calling and writing to your representatives, and keep talking to your neighbors. Let's bridge that gap of ignorance and misinformation. Embrace your unique experiences, listen to others, and let compassion guide your actions. We're all in this together, and our collective ripples will come together in a tidal wave of change. And just piggybacking on what Meg said, I heard on Father Mike's Catechism in a year a few days ago that our responsibilities as Catholics is to, in whatever way we can, become involved in societal issues, including politics and government. So I thought that was pretty fortuitous that that came up just a few days ago on his podcast. So thank you again for having me here today. It was such a pleasure, and I'm so happy to be part of this conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions you may have. Let's keep up the momentum for justice and equality. You all are amazing.
Wow.
I've got lipstick on my teeth. Oh, shoot. I had a slide with some resources of some of the things that I mentioned earlier in my presentation, but maybe if that's not working right now, I think John was going to pop that on the website, but thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll find a way to share them somehow, but thank you so much, Judy and Rachel, excuse me. And I wrote to myself a note here, you have your boots on the ground. You're doing amazing stuff. We found out 2 days ago that you volunteered to be with Nancy O'Byrne to be part of the delegation that is going to be meeting with the Bishop of St. Augustine. Bishop Meyer has graciously agreed to meet with us, and we look forward to that conversation. And then I only found out this morning what you mentioned kind of at the very end, that you're throwing your hat in the ring for the district there in Jacksonville Beach. So thank you for being with us. And we are so happy to have had the relationship with you. And we look forward to doing more things with you, Rachel.
Me too.
So
thank you, John.
Yes, thank you. So if I may, I'm going to now introduce our fourth and final speaker. Dr. Russell Meyer kind of came to us through multiple sources. There he is. And he has been a tremendous gift to us. If Meg began, and if she referenced a theology of advocacy, I think Russell's going to talk about a spirituality of advocacy. So what two wonderful bookends of a wonderful evening of all kinds of information and knowledge. Russell comes to us as the executive director of the Florida Council of Churches. He knows the Tallahassee routine very well, and I know he knows Michael Sheedy. Those two have shared things together over the years. He also serves as a Lutheran pastor here in Springfield, downtown Jacksonville, St. John's Lutheran Church, historically old German church, which I had the pleasure of worshiping with him and his community some weeks ago. So Reverend Russell Meyer, thank you for being with us as you talk about your theory of change and the spirituality of advocacy, sir.
Thanks so much, John. It's great to be with you and all the speakers. And Michael Sheedy and I have kind of walked side by side about the same length of time, the halls in Tallahassee. It's just good to be with you all and be with him and Meg and Rachel. Let me start by just underlining something I heard in what Rachel said. is that democracy is a participatory event. It is not a spectator sport. And when we sit on the sidelines, then democracy fails. We all have to be civically engaged. That's what makes democracy work. And the places where democracy gets weakened is in saying who gets to participate, right? So the demos, we need to be making certain that as many people from as many different walks of life get to participate. That's what makes democracy strong. But the full participation of the people in our society. So let's work for that. I want to begin with a scripture or two. The Apostle Paul, you might remember, says to the church in Corinth, who was in the midst of a very divisive moment in its life, that I decided to know nothing among you except the anointed Jesus and him executed or crucified. We like to invoke Jesus in the midst of division, but sometimes the Jesus we invoke is not the one that Paul's talking about, the executed Jesus, the one who suffers innocently, right? And that Jesus is the Jesus that's actually in regularly all around us. There's a saying in the Lutheran church, you may have heard of Luther's 95 Theses, but one of its central tenets is a statement that the true treasure of the church is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And we need to have a sense of what that means when we translate the presence of Jesus into our lives. And that means that we're looking for the innocent suffering in the world, in our society, in our families, in our communities, and etc. That's the face of Jesus on the cross, the innocent suffering. And when we are in touch with that suffering, and many of us are through our ministries, whether it's soup kitchens or helping the elderly or teaching disadvantaged kids, whatever our ministries, working with farm workers and immigrants, we are one-on-one with human suffering. We are the bearers of the stories of pain and grief, of lament, of injustice, of oppression. We bear those. If we're living our Christian life in our communities, we're in touch with those who suffer. They may be in our own families. They may be we ourselves. We're with the people who've been rejected, who've been lost. We come to know and understand that the greatest reason for homelessness among young people is they've been driven out of their homes because of their self-understanding of who they are. We begin to know about where the violence is in our communities and etc. Gathering these stories of our humanity up and bringing them to the legislature, that's the true treasure of the church. Bringing the whole story of humanity into the places where public policy is made, so that public policy knows what it can actually do to serve all of humanity. And the particular charisma of our Christian advocacy is not that we're speaking for ourselves necessarily, or for our organization or for our church. We're speaking the cries of pain wherever we find them in society. And we're saying, because of our baptism, we're just immersed in human solidarity, of mutual solidarity. And as we talk about this issue, that issue, the other issue, all of these various issues, wherever they come from, end up being connected to how we've dehumanized people, and we've set them aside. We say they don't matter, that they don't deserve our pity or our attention or empathy or love or our compassion. And when we bring the reality of their stories into the public square, policy begins to change. When legislators stand up and they make their closing arguments about which way they're going to vote on a bill, they almost always have a story to tell to bring it home. We can provide the treasury of those stories in our advocacy that carry the message home wherever people are. One of the most effective campaigns of advocacy in the last decade or so was the We Are Florida campaign. And in that campaign, immigrants from across the state, mothers and children, filled the halls of the Capitol building for weeks on end with prayer and song, with children greeting legislators at their office doors, and as they came and went from chambers, singing songs. I have a picture in front of the Senate President's office, just surrounded by immigrant children, as we're there to present a petition to keep our families intact. And the sponsor of the bill that year that was going to basically criminalize being an undocumented person in the state of Florida, down on tears on the Senate floor and voted against his own bill because of the stories we put into the Capitol. And so as we go about in the work that we do, what I really want to emphasize for you is don't worry about whether or not you're a policy wonk. Everybody knows you're not. So don't worry about trying to be that. But the issue that you choose to speak to, know a real story. No, I've been there, I've seen this. This needs attention. The love of God calls me to bring that into the room. Now, let me just say a couple of other things about bringing the spirituality, the spirit of other people into the room. Right now, there's a major division across our society over the difference between religious expression and religious nationalism. And we have to work very hard to help separate this, because the truth is religious nationalism has been embedded in all of our traditions for a long time. And in the society going forward, a multi-faith, multi-religious society, we have to be very careful about that. So just quickly, religious is how I use religion to inform myself, to change me. Religious nationalism is how I use religious symbols to say whether or not somebody else belongs and what they need to do to be accepted. The first part is genuine faith. The second part is just finger pointing. And so we really need to help ourselves, our friends, or our people to separate the difference between the true religion, which is uncoerced feeling for God, a love for God, etc., and this idea that somehow in the name of God, we can decide whether people are in or out. That's just, that's a rejection of their human dignity. So I want to encourage you to think about that. I want to leave you with the task, and I'm going to quickly share my screen here. Oh, well, I guess I'm not.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Here we go. What you see here is a map of Senate districts. And if you were to count all these up, let me just say, large landed districts outnumber the smaller people districts. And that's a general problem we have across our country at state and federal levels. Land has more vote than people do. And so it's really important. It's really important that we bring these human stories that we know into the offices. Secondly, the thing that I would like you to do is make who your legislators are, and reach out to them in these next few weeks. Establish relationships. You can do that, etc. Get to know them, what they're about, get to know what committees that they're on. I wanted to move over here one more thing here, and let's see. Here we go. I just wanted to show you, this is my representative, Angie Nixon. And I just go to her page on the House website, and I see all the committees that she's on. So I have my list of issues. I want to look and see if on my list of issues, if she's on one of these committees. If she is, then I can go in and talk with her about that up front and on the beginning. If I have an issue and my member is not on any committee that attended, they really can't affect the process. They'll get to talk about it on the floor. So knowing the issues and the committee assignments of your members are really important. Get to know them beforehand. And when you go to Tallahassee later on in the year, they'll remember you and you will have a better relationship. But know this, the relationship you build, bringing the gospel of peace in your own person into that office is the most important thing that's needed in Tallahassee right now. The whole process right now, because of polarization in our society, is dehumanizing even the elected people. So be the presence of Christ as you go into these offices. Be a pastoral presence. Let them know that you're there and they can feel the spirit of Jesus because you're bringing all of Jesus's wounds with you. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Reverend Russell Meyer. Stay right there, Russell, because what we're going to do is we're going to bring all of you on screen here, and we're going to bring in Ann Richter, and Ann is going to facilitate our Q&A. And as soon as we get everybody on board, while you say that, just to echo what Reverend Russell just said, I happen to check out my legislators' websites just this morning. And I know Joe from the Right for Clean Water Act is going to hear his ears pop on this, that the chair of the House Committee on Water Quality is in my district. I didn't know that until this morning. So it's exactly what the scenario you painted. So here we all are. Ann, let me pass it over to you. I'd like to introduce to you Ann Richter. Could we maybe highlight Ann and just, I guess it's easier just to have us all there because that's too much bouncing around. Thank you. Ann?
Great. Thank you. Such energizing talks. I'm sure it's just, you've got all kinds of ideas and thoughts on this. And so continue to put your questions into the chat. Now, Michael, you are the star of the questions this time. You have to unmute yourself right now. Good. And there's can you read the chats yourself? Yeah. Anyway, there's 3 questions there for Michael. In what ways are the bishops diverse? And what are their most pressing issues right now for this legislative session that's coming on? And then how do we get our communications in front of a bishop? Yes, that's a whole talk.
Well, I can certainly take the first one or the last one first, perhaps. I know that the Pax Christi letter, I think, was sent to all the bishops, and I received a copy of that. I believe that they've received that, and that is one way. They do have email accounts, and they do receive correspondence, and I think many of them, try to be faithful to responding to a lot of inquiries. So I think, that's my experience with them. Every now and then they might ask me a question about, do you know about this? I'm not too sure about how to respond, and we try to tell them what we know and help them to do that if that's helpful to them. As far as the 3 most pressing issues, it's hard to say that the top 3 pressing ones. We very often during Catholic Days at the Capitol, it's an event that we hold every year. People from Florida come. We've typically narrowed some things down to 3 issues or 4 issues for people to learn about that are priority issues. But to this point, I don't know that I could tell you the 3 most pressing ones. There was a lot that happened last year for good and for bad, and a lot was done. And so I think that this will be a quieter part of the biennium, perhaps, but that could be proven wrong. I will say that I can just I'll just maybe speak a bit more stream of consciousness, if you will. But they do divide their interest into the areas of life and human dignity. I know that there probably will not be a lot of work around abortion this year, except to perhaps roll back some of the protections that were added. I don't know how those will fare, but we'll see. We hear that there'll be a push that way. The death penalty remains something in that area that's very much a priority of the bishops. And they've asked us to, as we speak about the death penalty, to focus on inmates and the conditions there and death row and throughout the prison system. It's woefully underfunded in so many ways. Staffing is very low. Morale has been low, although the state is beginning to take steps to try to improve that. There's a long way to go to make that a rehabilitative process, and the bishops have asked us to focus on that and with respect to life and dignity. There was a lot done in education to expand parental choice in education last year. I think that there are ways to enhance that and continue to promote strong schools of all sorts, to improve them and to keep high quality education at the forefront. With respect to healthcare, there is a lot of concern to try to extend care to everyone. Medicaid expansion was mentioned. It's not been an interest at all of the legislature, despite the opportunity afforded by the Affordable Care Act. I think that that there's not likely to be much happening there, but that remains a commitment. And I think that they've raised some concerns, particularly about nursing home care and the Medicaid program. For vulnerable seniors who are covered through that, and that's a payers kind of thing. Those are some things that come to mind that I know that they've been asking us to focus on. Avoiding debt traps, those kinds of things for residents of Florida trying to deal with predatory lending and respond appropriately to that is something that they stay focused on as well. So we're close to releasing their public policy priorities. They've had some discussion, but those are things that have been out there, and I wouldn't say I could say the top three.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
And I'll quickly say on the diversity, they're diverse in age, background, ethnic diversity remains there, where they're from, what they studied in school. Those are some of the ways that they are diverse. Probably different, register with different political parties, stuff like that.
Wow, thank you. I think that's a big help. And it's something that hopefully we are going to be engaging in with our bishops soon. And so this kind of an orientation toward it is a big help. And we haven't had other questions, but I was wondering, for the people who are listening, what did you find most challenging? I heard some really wonderful, challenging statements here. And just pop a little question into your spot here. It's so easy to type it in. I'm sure that, as you look at this, you do feel overwhelmed with its, a mandate almost for us on what we need to do and be responding to in our society. And you all come with a great different perspective. And I think one of the things that was emphasized in the talks is that we want this different perspective. And that's what you have that to offer to people. And so I like what we were saying, be bold. And so when it comes to writing your questions now, you can be bold and put down a few things that you think might be especially helpful to other people to hear. Because I often find that I learn a lot from other people's questions. I think, oh yeah, that question was in the back of my head. I just didn't know how to formulate it. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, what is it to meddle in politics? How do you meddle really effectively? And that was Meg that was trying to get us to meddle effectively. And of course, Meg, you just might give us a couple of ways that we can meddle and raise up some energy when we write into the legislature. I think getting to know them, as Dr. Meyer was saying, that's crucial. That will mean a lot more when we do meddle.
If I may, Ann,
Yes.
I'm with Meg about the meddling stuff and with Francis. but I wanna meddle with their soul, if I can put it that way. Which is genuinely asking, what brought you here? Why did you want to do this? What put you in the room? And are you able to accomplish that? Do you feel accomplish that? Are there obstacles in the way? I have a very good friend who served in the legislature, and she told me the other day she wouldn't go back today because the current environment is destructive of the soul. The high pressure, the divisiveness, people are making personal unethical choices in their own lives outside of it, etc. And it's a really terrible place to be. So I just, don't be afraid to put your personal faith there and say, this is why I'm here. Why are you here?
Great. Meg, did you want to add to that?
I was looking at Mary Ann's question about specific actions that lead to developing a relationship with a legislator. And I'd love, even though I'm not a Floridian, I'd love to jump in and just talk about this. So I think, and I think this goes to Joseph's question as well, or sorry, not Joseph's, Don's, about the best time to approach a legislator, and building off of what Russell was saying, like this fall is definitely a great time for you to do that in district work. And I think there's a lot of different ways, depending on if you're connected to a ministry or like where you're rooted in your community, to build that relationship. When I was at the Missouri Catholic Conference, we used to have events. We used to train our folks to do like small house parties where maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people would invite their representative over for coffee or meet them out in a coffee shop. And they would have bring the policy papers and kind of talk through a little bit of like what their interests are, but then asking those questions that Russell was talking about, what made you decide to run? What are you working on this year? What are your priorities? So it is definitely a dialogue. If you are connected to a ministry, a shelter at your parish, or if your parish is comfortable, or volunteering out somewhere else, like having them come visit and learning about like what does poverty look like in their district, or what does an immigration experience look like in their district, is eye-opening. So I think all of those things, if you can establish yourself as kind of a local expert on the district, that is really helpful as well. So all of those things are great ways to build relationships, and something you can do before January.
Great. Rachel, did you have something on this issue?
I think talking to people, trying to hear what they have to say, and maybe you don't agree with it right away, but sometimes just listening to someone kind of disarms them a little bit, and they feel like if they feel heard, maybe they'll be a little bit more inclined to hear your perspective instead of just jumping in maybe with what you have to say. Because I've seen it kind of go both ways, where somebody comes in, already ready for a fight, and it doesn't really get anywhere. But if you just kind of listen, you have a lot better chance then to kind of present your perspective and maybe get somewhere.
Great. I think the best course I ever taught was course I took was on adult education, and how listening was one of the most important factors, and also what the other person said is what they will remember. And so engaging them in that dialogue is so, so important. Right. So Michael, it looks like there's one last question for you about if the bishops are looking at some of the environmental issues right now at this time.
The bishops are looking at environmental issues. They were particularly supportive of, I think it's been several years, but I think the legislature made a $2.5 billion commitment to water projects and Everglades restoration kind of work. Actually, just the first 4 years of Governor DeSantis's tenure in that respect. I will tell you just some inside baseball. It's of interest to the bishops, to be sure. But our office, we're staffed by different healthcare policy people and social concerns policy people, and we've had some transition in recent months. And so we have 2 openings right now among our 3 policy people. And so we're planning to bring at least 1 and perhaps 2 on very soon. One of those will have some responsibility for the environment and environmental policies. And that's one of the things that the bishops have asked us to even dig more deeply into, just to, to continue to follow the lead that Pope Francis had really set with Laudato Si, and, the importance of care for creation. Obviously, we live in Florida. Climate change is affecting us. Hurricanes affect us. Resiliency is necessary. The bishops know that. They experience that. And so it's something important.
Great, thank you. Rachel.
Yes, I wanted to ask Michael, I thought I heard you say Catholics at the Capitol, which I'm assuming is along the lines of Tally Days or when Equality Florida or one of the groups goes. And that, I think, is a great way for people to get their feet wet. And because when I first started legislative advocacy, I was like, okay, what did I learn in elementary school and high school again? Like, how does a bill become a law and that whole, after school rock thing? And I had to look it up and refresh all my information. And I think just being in the Capitol, you kind of get a better sense of it. So that I think would be a great event for people just to come to if they can. Not everybody can do that. But how do we find out more about that and sign up and be a part of that?
Yeah, check out our website. We have a lot of resources there. It's www.FLA, so a 3-letter Florida FLA, then CCB, Conference Catholic Bishops.org. And Catholic Days at the Capitol is on there. There will be opportunities to register. I think the dates this year will be February 6th and 7th, Tuesday and Wednesday. And I think May Oliver I know a lot of you are in St. Augustine Diocese. I think she's the coordinator for that event from the diocese there.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to turn this back to John.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Ann. Stay on board. You all stay right there. Just throw me back up there if you could, Judy, so that there's the 6 of us here. We were going to have a second section here. We're running out of time, but I'm going to take the liberty of using the question that was posed by one of our participants, and it's actually right on to what we wanted to end with. And the question is this, because we're coming to the end of this one training, okay? We really haven't done anything yet. The question is, what specific actions can we take to developing a relationship with our legislator? You think you may have addressed it, but I think we want you to drill that down. And I open that up to all of the panelists, please. What specific actions lead to developing a positive working relationship by inference with a legislator? Because I'm going to be calling on, what I'm going to do? I'm going to do it the next 2 weeks. I'm going to make a call, and both of mine are incumbents, which is another challenge. But how do I do it?
Well, I would say one of the most impactful things has been referenced is to contact your lawmaker's office, whether it's a representative or a Senate, and invite them to come out and visit a parish ministry that is serving human need. Or, we have a community garden at St. John's that sits on the street, and we don't have to pick it. Transitional people living, the houseless people, they are gleaning the garden on a regular basis, right? We never anticipated that happening. And so to bring a legislator and say, look, urban farming's a major issue. It's been going through, it's beginning more and more. We need more urban farming because we're in a food desert. And so you bring them there, you see what they're doing, and things happen in the legislator's mind when they see involved in a ministry that's actually solving problems. And that creates impressions that you can work with. And if you can get a legislator to come to visit you and see hands-on ministry involved with human suffering, It creates highways of love you can travel down later on.
I would add just to what Russell said, either go to them, ask for a meeting, ask if you can come talk to them about something that you care a lot about, bring a group, say you can like to bring a group, or else invite them to your place or to some event. If they like the opportunity to meet lots of people, and particularly if they have a chance to speak, or if there's a particular program, where they can get to know a larger group of people, be recognized perhaps. Those are ways to do it. Like if you have a meeting around something that's happening, a good thing, invite them to come and be part of the meeting and meet the people. They can say a little bit about who they are too. Everybody gets to know everybody. Make it, try to keep it win-win. Focus on things that are not necessarily confrontational, but do build a relationship. And that, as Russell said, I think focusing on the need to address is kind of transcends, a lot of the partisan, concern. Like, hard to argue what the real need is there. Maybe how best to meet it is a point to argue about, but it's just good to focus on that.
I just wanted to say, don't forget the legislative aides as well. When I was visiting up in Washington, D.C. and meeting with one of the young ones, I invited him to a birth center down here. We were looking at birth center legislation. And he said, oh, I'm going home next week down to Tampa. Could I come and I said, that would be wonderful. Come and visit. And he did. And so he's then able to tell his legislator about his experience. And I think that can be very meaningful.
I know some of my reps, I know where their offices are, just even in my own district. So you could set up a meeting that way, I believe. I don't know how easy it is to get to meet the actual representative or if it would be an aide, but the times I went with groups, I did get to meet legislators, especially Equality Florida. They had already set up meetings with the legislators. I mean, we didn't have an in-depth meeting, but at least we got some FaceTime and got to meet them that way. And I'm assuming probably Catholics at the Capitol would have the same kind of thing where you can meet a bunch of legislators all at once.
Yeah, I would say, just to piggyback on Rachel's comment, back in the district, they tend to have more time. If they give you a meeting, it's a bit more relaxed and leisurely. In Tallahassee, it's very helpful. It's important for them to see people from home, from their districts, but there's typically just less access to them because there's so many people vying for their attention when they're there in Tallahassee. When I started doing this 20 years ago, you could meet with every member of a committee before a committee hearing to talk about concerns, frame up amendments. Now it's very hard. Our access has changed drastically, and it's very challenging. So both, it's good to come to Tallahassee, and it's good to meet at home, but at home you can get more time for that relationship to begin.
Yeah.
I would add also to Rachel has referenced it, but she hasn't named it. So let me name it, Rachel. Find other organizations that ally with the issues that you're cutting and get to know them, know who your partners are. And, things can start happening really quickly during the session. And if you're traveling alone, you'll just be sort of lost and the parade is going to go on beside you. You need to know who you can work with. And so Michael referenced predatory lending. And we have worked together, tag teamed, if you will, in testimony on predatory lending and some other issues. Know who your allies are, build relationships that way, and help humanize their witness. Let me say this again, help humanize their witness. There's this angry, resentful, confrontational spirit that's in lobbying and advocacy today. But let's help people lead with empathetic compassion rather than with anger. Lead with the heart and energy, not the gut.
Yeah.
And just don't underestimate your local clubs either, because they'll set you up with all kinds of resources and get you connected. It's just been fabulous here.
Folks,
I can keep track of.
I'm going to interject here because we are actually over time. This has been marvelous. I'm going to offer a thing here real quickly. we're switching to our website, and we want to make sure everyone is aware on some of these things that you all have mentioned are actually on here. On the Florida Legislature website page, you will find links to the House and the Senate. You will find a marvelous tool to actually find your senator, and if you're not familiar, and your House representative. And you can also check out some media sources that monitor what's going on. We have the wonderful Networks Handbook that Meg forwarded to us and shared with us, and we're thrilled to have that. So just make a point of taking a look at that. And we also want to be able to show you the issues pages, but you can figure that out. So let me just come back here. And first of all, thank you all for being with us. There are some things that our steering committee has decided informally, and some may not all be aware of this, but we're going to start next week with our first weekly action bulletin, where we're going to try to posture at least 1 or 2 concrete things that people in the campaign can do. Some are based on the timeliness of events. We have a god-awful 6th execution since January scheduled on Tuesday. And so our people will certainly want to vigil and gather in prayerful resistance to that, and do what they feel they need to do in that regard. There's also going to be an effort to help people identify their legislators, and we'll send them information on that. We also have the wonderful news to share with you that through the help of a small bequest, we're going to be able to take out actual ads in, we think, all 7 diocesan publications. We booked the first ad with the diocesan for the Diocese of St. Augustine, and they have helped us. We think it's an excellent ad. It's to use the words, I think, of Mike Sheedy. It proposes, it doesn't impose, and it invites people into relationship with us, to get into relationship with the legislators. So you can look forward to receiving that information. We also want to let you know that we're going to do more things like this, and you're going to have an exit survey where the question will be asked, what other specific kinds of things would you like? Like, we could have a whole thing on how do you write a letter to the editor. That may be obvious to some people, but not to others. It could be a whole thing on how do you get on the schedule to give some type of presentation at a committee meeting, if you can even do that, if you know where there is a committee meeting. How do you track, Russell always talks about the moving target. He alluded to that. This is a moving target. You know, we're not professional lobbyists. We actually should not use that word. We're faithful citizen advocates. So you'll have a chance to make those suggestions in the exit survey. We also want to remind our listeners and viewers that there are many spaces open for people to join the issue committees. And if you go to our website, you'll see that we have 4 committees kind of forming now, where the most energy is on racism, gun violence, creation and crisis, and the death penalty. The other 4 will hopefully come to life in the next month or so. But we need people, we need flesh and blood. This is a collaboration of people leading people and connecting with other people, which I think was the point that Russell was saying. So I thank you all for being with us tonight, and may the Spirit guide us. And we are so grateful for our panelists. So thank you. Good evening.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Good night.